refuting affirmative action. My opponent's major claim was race and gender should not be taken into consideration in hiring and college admissions in the United States. My opponent's secondary claims were, number one, it promotes reverse discrimination. Number two, it may lower the quality of the universities. And number three, there are other ways to help minorities. My response to my opponent's claims is that race and gender are no longer taken into consideration in college decisions in the U.S., and affirmative action can be helpful in hiring. I will challenge my opponent's evidence and reasoning to support his claims. Although affirmative action is not as relevant today as it was many years ago, and all of his information sources date over to 5 years ago. So on his first claim, he stated that affirmative action promotes reverse discrimination. The term reverse discrimination is not clearly stated, and it's kind of confusing. Princeton Dictionary defines it as the unfair treatment of a person or group on the basis of prejudice, which makes it confusing. Now, reverse discrimination would be the opposite of this. So, I don't know. I didn't understand it so well. He also used the Supreme Court ruling of Fake versus the Regents of the University of California, in which this guy trying to get into a medical school, UC Davis Medical School, he applied twice. The first time he applied, he got rejected. The reason why he got rejected was because he applied late, way far into the year, and his scores, I think SAT scores, were only 468 out of 500. That school, well, it used to be, it still is, extremely competitive. They were not taking anyone with a score underneath 470. He didn't meet the standards, and so he was rejected. He applied again, and he also didn't get in. He sued the University of California because he says that just because he wasn't Hispanic or a minority, he didn't get in. But it's not true. The Supreme Court, well, not the Supreme Court itself, but they did argue about the fact that, yeah, he didn't get in once, based on maybe because he didn't have the points because he was a minority, but the first time was because his scores weren't good enough. And then, on the second one, the case of Gratz versus Bollinger, and the court ruled accomplishments should come before race. This young lady, Jennifer Gratz, she also tried to follow this, the other guy, Bake's, history in suing the university for not letting her in just because she was white, but she didn't really get any compensation, although the court did rule that, accomplishments should come before your race. They also stated that she based her whole case on a point system that the school used to use. People back in 1977, they would get points just for being a minority. She tried to use that argument, but she didn't apply until 1990-something, when that was already outlawed. So she didn't fit into the category. She was just trying to, make a name for herself. My opponent also stated that affirmative action may lower the quality of the universities, but he showed no proof. And in fact, ever since 1977 and the Supreme Court cases, minorities have had higher graduation rates. If these students meet the same standards to graduate from the universities as whites do, having more students earn a degree from school is only beneficiary and does not affect the quality of education. Yes, Gratz and Blake had higher scores than the minorities accepted into these schools, but that does not determine the quality of schools. That just bases the rankings upon two students. According to the EEOC, minorities have nearly doubled the college degrees they've earned over the past 20 years without the use of affirmative action. They got their degree on their own, and you can't give these accomplishments to affirmative action. Okay, maybe they helped them get in, but didn't help them graduate in any way. My opponent admitted that affirmative action in schools no longer takes place, and that even after the laws came in, a higher number of minority students have been accepted into universities. This does not support any of his claims. Instead, it admits the issue is no longer relevant, and that minorities are slowly moving up in society, getting a higher education. He also stated that there are other ways to help minorities through the use of grants, scholarships, and reaching out to high schools, but that contradicts itself. If affirmative action should not be taken into consideration for admissions and hiring because it violates the equality, then it doesn't make sense for minorities to receive aid to attend college while whites wouldn't. The fourth claim, my opponent never gave any data to understand why race and gender should not be taken into consideration in hiring in the United States. I personally think affirmative action is not harmful when hiring, as long as it's done professionally, meaning that the person qualifies for the job. This obviously does not apply to California, since affirmative action has been banned for this state for about 14 years after Proposition 209. Hiring different genders and races to perform a task is not harmful as long as they meet the qualifications for the job. People usually seek help from a person they can relate to. You don't want to feel stupid when you go and ask a question, so you ask for someone who's around your level. Like, you're not going to go ask a professor something, I don't know, what size shoe you're wearing. You're going to go to someone who could understand you or whatever. It's always useful to have people with diverse backgrounds working together, especially at government agencies and tourist sites, since not everyone in this country speaks English and needs assistance they can understand. I hope you all agree that race and gender are no longer as relevant as they were before in college admission decisions in the U.S. and that affirmative action can be helpful in hiring.
All right, well, you start off labeling the claims pretty clearly. I'm not exactly sure that the application of the Bakke case that you have is accurate. You're challenging the facts of the case when the case was ruled on by the court, and at that point the interpretation is what becomes relevant, and you don't really talk about what the court's interpretation was, what their decision in Bakke was, and what it meant for affirmative action. Same thing with the second case, I think it's the University of Michigan case that you're talking about. You start talking about some of the facts in the case, and again, once it reaches the court, the facts are pretty much established. The question is then, what is the interpretation or legitimate application of law in those situations? And I don't really think you get into that issue as clearly as you need to. You kind of get sidetracked on some other points that might have been relevant before the court ruled, but after the court's ruled, all of those things are mostly moot. I do think you have a valid point in suggesting that there's less need for this one way or the other over time, because we've increased the number of minorities that are graduating. I think that's the way you want that argument to go. Otherwise, it's not really relevant, because there's no demonstration that they're doing that because of affirmative action, so it doesn't actively defend your position. The only way that it's applicable is if your argument is we don't need it one way or the other because they're accomplishing this goal, regardless. Okay, then that might be a good point, although I think it tends to support the advocate's position too, that clearly we don't need these things, although I'm not sure he shows that there's a negative consequence. The argument about it contradicting itself on the last point, that kind of assumes that whites would not be getting the assistance also. The example that you came up with at the end about asking for assistance was a little bit confusing. I'm not exactly sure how it applied. 10.5. That's the shoe size. All right, and I think at the end you've got this argument about need for diversity. I think that would be a good counterclaim, but it needs to be developed a little bit more. All right, thank you.